Welcome to Inventory Base, and this is our webinar this afternoon about 5 steps to limit risks in the rental property. My name is Sián and I'll be taking you through today's webinar. Expected to be around about 30 minutes or so, and at the very end there will be links for you to contact us should you have any further queries or want to go over any parts of this webinar. So, the webinar is about risk management and specifically about the new law that came into effect on the 20th of March 2019. And that is to do with private rented houses and flats that are fit for human habitation. And the Act, which is initially called the Fits for Human Habitation and now called Homes Act 2018, came about because of the fact there's such a disparity in the industry in regards to how properties are maintained, how safe they are, and that there are more properties in the private rented sector that effectively just weren't safe, weren't fit for human habitation. So the government came up with a 29-point risk assessment that is designed to make the renting of a home safer for tenants. Now, there is also the health and safety rating system, which a lot of the councils and environmental health officers use in order to rate the property and find out whether it's got any category 1 or category 2 hazards. That also is like a 29-point risk assessment. However, that is more algorithm based and it's more detailed, and 9 times out of 10 it's done by professional environmental officers with the right qualifications, the right training to be able to do this. So the idea behind the Homes Act and this particular assessment is to make it more accessible for landlords and agents to understand and to be able to work out what the risk of the property is, and then hopefully then sort that risk out and make sure that the property is fit, and that going forward there shouldn't be any more issues with the tenant living there, that they're safe and that the property is exactly what it should be, safe for anybody to enter and to live in. So, limits or steps to limit the risk. The first step in risk management is knowing and understanding what the risk is. So the 5 steps to limit risk in rentals is, first one is got to identify the hazards. You've got to understand what those are. So for fitness for human habitation, the 29 risks are, as you can see now, because there is 29, I don't intend on going all the way through them, but I will pick out a few. So if we look on the most common ones, your mold, your damp, your excess cold, your excess heat, and look at what happens there. Often, especially in rental properties, we see a lot of mold and damp. Now, sometimes that's because of the property itself. Maybe there's not enough ventilation, that the exterior walls are cold, maybe there's not enough lagging in the between the walls, between the surfaces, or there's not enough extractor fans or ways for the tenant or for the householder to air the property. So mold and damp occur, but often it can be down to tenant use, because maybe they're drying clothes inside the property, they're not ventilating it well. So of course, all that moisture hasn't got anywhere to go. Heat and temperature all rises upwards. You cause condensation on the ceiling, on the walls, or behind units, especially if there's not much airflow, and damp and mold will occur. So it's not necessarily tenant's fault, it's not necessarily landlord's fault, but what has to happen is it needs to be dealt with. So that's one of the risks on the 29 risks for fitness for human habitation. You've also got excess cold. Now, at the moment, we've got varying temperatures because of climate, just generally where we are in the seasons. We're still in summer, we're about to go into autumn time, but temperatures drop and increase all the time. But with excess cold, what the rule of thumb is it shouldn't be colder inside the property than it is outside the property. And as someone who does inventory reports and does risk assessments, I have found properties where you can literally see your breath inside the property as opposed to outside. So of course that's not great for a tenant living there. So you've got to make sure that there's effective heat sources, so electric heaters, gas fired boilers, and radiators. Got to make sure that it's fit and it's comfortable for the person to use to be able to live in comfortably. So you're looking to make sure that the heaters and the boilers are well maintained. You've got the right certificates, electrical and gas safety certificates, to make sure that all the appliances are doing exactly what they should do. You also have the opposite issue of excess heat. Again, we're having varying degrees of summer this year. We've had a couple of weeks where it's been extremely hot. People want to open up all the windows, want to vent and be able to do that. But sometimes in rental properties, you can't do that because either the windows won't open, that the locks or the keys for the locks aren't present. And if that's the case, then that is a risk because one, you can't ventilate. If it gets too hot, people can become unwell, especially if it's young children, especially if it's babies who can't regulate their heat. Equally, there's then the issue of being able to exit the property as well. So if you haven't got locks to open the windows and you need to ventilate and you can't, then that's a real big problem. That's, again, a very big risk. So there's 3 on those. So let's look at some of the other ones. We've got uncombusted gas, crowding space, intruders, lighting, noise, hygiene, food safety. So lighting, quite an easy one, quite straightforward. You need to be able to see what you're doing. All properties should have lights that are both safe. So they've been tested under the new legislation for EICRs, and that they're actually able to work in the property, and that the right bulbs are there. Hygiene, pest and refuse, that's talking about the fact that you need proper places for food preparation, but equally also then to dispose of that food. So your bins, so you need a bin for recycling, a bin for food waste, a bin for normal waste. But then they need to be put somewhere. They need to have somewhere they can be stored safely so that the tenants can use them, and also make sure that then they're collected. So without those, again, that's a potential risk because there's a potential there for pests to radiate around the property, around the bin area, especially if you're talking about flats and places like that where you tend to have communal bins. So there's going to be a lot of bins, a lot of waste, and then the potential for pests is much higher. So these are the kind of things that are looking for in regards to the risks to the property. Also looking at things like sanitation and drainage. So, do you have enough toilets and enough bathroom facilities for people to be able to wash, use the sanitary ware, and it's enough for the amount of people that are physically there. So for argument's sake, if you had a 4-bedroom house and 1 toilet, that probably wouldn't work. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a risk, but obviously that would make it more difficult for the amount of people in the property. But if you've got 1 toilet to, say, a 6-bedroom HMO, then that is not going to be fit for purpose, and that could potentially cause problems, especially if you've got that many people trying to use the one toilet, the one facility. You've also got to look at risks in regards to falls, and predominantly these are baths and showers, because quite often they are slippery because of what they're used for. There's water, there's condensation in there. So you've got to think about, from a landlord's point of view, how can you minimise that risk? Can you put grab handles in? Is there grab handles maybe in the shower or on the bath area? Anything to limit the potential risk for that to happen. And that's similar also to falls and stairs and steps. Sometimes in some of the properties I've been in, the stairs are too steep. You're literally almost climbing them as opposed to walking them. So if that's the case, then there should be handrails on either side, depending on the size of the staircase. And if they're not there, then there's a potential there for injury, potential for fall, potential for the tenants or the visitors to have accidents because the right equipment's not there. So these are the kind of things that, as landlords, as agents, you should be thinking about, and that's what the risk assessments help you understand and be able to highlight and then hopefully then rectify. And this is no different for electrical hazards. EICRs are there to make sure that all the electrical items and the wiring and the systems within the property are safe. If they're not, then there's fines for both that over and above what the health and safety executive would get involved with. So you've got to make sure that you're looking at all these potential hazards rather than just thinking, well, everything looks okay, then I don't really have to do anything. And the whole point of the risk assessment is to identify these, to kind of make you go through a list and look at your property and look at it properly, so you can see, is there any problem? What do I need to do about it? What can I do in order to minimise any potential risks? something comes up quite a lot for me is collision and entrapment. A lot of people don't understand what that means, but a lot of that is down to like things like doors and doorways where you potentially might get trapped, or equally trapped fingers. So you might see, especially in commercial properties and buildings, you'll see a lot of guards around the hinge areas to stop little hands and children getting their fingers caught, or from the door from snapping back onto them. So these are the kind of risks that you, as a landlord and also as an agent managing a property portfolio, should be looking at in order to make sure the property is safe and fit for human habitation. So you've identified the hazards, but then what do you then do about it? So at this point, the next step is evaluate the risks. So the way to evaluate the risk is to complete a risk assessment. That's the easiest way. With inventory base, we've already thought about that. We've looked at the 29 risks, and we've put that into a very easy to understand, usable template where we gauge the risk between low, medium, and high. And as you can see from the slide here, we're looking at the likelihood versus the impact of that particular risk. So how likely is it to happen, and what is the impact on it? And then from there, you can gauge whether it's going to be a big risk, so a low risk, a medium risk, or a high risk. That's something that you have to then deal with. And certainly when you're looking at the councils, you're looking at health and safety, etc., they are looking to see, what the potential for danger, for harm, for accidents is that there are for the tenants, for the people visiting the property, and how you then mitigate them. And the thing with any kind of risk assessment, and even if you just do like what we call a dynamic risk assessment, you just have a good look round and make sure it's okay there and then you move on. You need to have the evidence. You need to showcase how much you've done as a landlord, as an agent, in order to mitigate that risk, to minimise that potential danger for your tenants, so that should that get called into question, should you have to go to court because the tenants complained and said that this property is not fair, it's not safe, then you've got the ability to showcase to a court, this is what I've done. I've gone through these 29 risks. I've assessed those risks. This is the evidence. These are the pictures. And then where there's risks and remedial action that I need to take, and this is what I've done. So you can complete a risk on so many different templates now. There's so many out there. But the benefit of using the inventory base app is that all the pictures are date and timed. The risks are laid out quite clearly, quite easy to understand. It's giving you a low, medium, and high risk ratio to work with, a rating to be able to highlight where the issues are, and then the ability to create actions, and the ability then to send that on to your contractor, to your electrician, to your gas safety engineer. Could be also to your gardener if there's risks in the garden from loose boards, poor flooring, rotting wood, rotting decking, that sort of thing, so that you can then take the steps to mitigate those risks, and then showcase, should anybody need to, that you've taken the necessary steps to make sure that the property is safe, and equally tenant is safe. So in order to take the next step, so you've gone identified the hazards, you've evaluated the risks, you've got to decide also then who might be harmed and how, because then that will then also determine what your steps are in regards to the mitigation side of things. So a lot of people just think, well, I've only got to think about tenants, but actually you don't. You need to be also thinking about visitors, contractors, property managers, basically anybody that's going to potentially be visiting that particular rental property throughout the course of the tenancy, both pre-tenancy and post-tenancy. Because at the end of the day, as landlords, you have a duty of care to anybody that's going to be entering your property, because you're effectively giving your property over for use by someone else, so therefore the onus is on you to make sure their health and safety is managed, and the way of doing that is by mitigating, again, the risk, going through the 29 risk assessment. But it's that it doesn't stop just at tenants, it includes visitors, so that could be the tenants' visitors, their friends, their family, could be any other organisation that's coming in. It's also your contractors, your electricians, your engineers, your inventory clerks, anybody that's associated with that property to do any kind of work in that property, including cleaners, anybody at all that might be going through that door. You've got a duty of care to make sure that whilst they're in your property, they're as safe as can be. And that's exactly the same for property managers as well. If you're managing that portfolio on behalf of the landlord, if you are or have an agreement where you take full responsibility for that property, you manage it, you do all the maintenance, you do everything, so it's got a complete hands off for the landlord, then effectively you are the landlord. So therefore the onus again is on you to make sure that anybody going to the property is safe. And that includes your own staff as well. If you're going there for property visits, you're sending them there for marketing, to do floor plans, to do pictures. You know, when they go to the property and go through that door, then it is your responsibility to make sure that they remain safe. Yes, there is an element of them making themselves safe as well, you know, taking responsibility for our own health and safety, but ultimately they would be looking, or the health and safety executive courts would be looking at the landlord with the agent in order to make sure that that property was kept safe as much as possible. And record your findings. A lot of time I speak to landlords and agents about doing risk assessments, and the health and safety executive does talk about, well, you know, yes, you need to do a risk assessment, but you don't necessarily need to write it down. The problem with that is then how do you then prove that you actually did the risk assessment? How do you actually prove that you did everything that you could do in order to mitigate any risk, and that, you know, you're in court and you're having this conversation with the judge, with the solicitor, tenant saying that the property wasn't fit, you're saying it was. How do you prove it? So for me, it makes perfect sense to record this, and that's again why Inventory Base has the risk templates already set up, waiting for you to use them. Once you've got your account, you can fetch them down to your device, do the reports at the property, sync up, date and time reference, pictures are automatic, your share history is automatic, and you can keep that report on your system, on your account, or create a PDF and keep it separately for the required time, which is normally around about 6 years. And in that way, then again, should you be called into question about the risks at the property, you can showcase what it is that you've done to mitigate them. Or equally, if you have to issue, as it stands at the moment, a Section 21, and that there's pushback from the tenant in regards to, they're saying, well, the property wasn't fit, there's loads of maintenance hasn't been done, you know, you've got no right to, you know, start the eviction process. You've got the body of evidence that a court and any people involved in the eviction process will want to see. And also, again, when it comes to the deposit as well. So you get into the end of the tenancy, tenant saying, you know, property was like this when I started the tenancy, and there's loads of issues, and you've got an inventory and you've got a check out, but you've also got a risk assessment as well. You can, it's extra evidence towards that evidence bundle to make sure that you can showcase exactly what it is that you've done, what the problems were, how you've mitigated them, and then that has the potential to help you go toward, you know, have access to the deposit if that is right, and that you should be able to take money from the deposit for legitimate reasons. That will help with your case. The risk assessment also will help develop actions for you. So it will give you an ability within the app to set an action to say, right, okay, I need an EICR. So the action will be employ or sub out to, say, Safe2, who work with Inventory Base for compliance certificates, and then you could create an action in order for that then to create a task to then actually go on to Safe2 to be able to then start work or commission for work and get a quote. But you can set actions all the way through to say the different things you either need to do or act as a reminder or as a renewal kind of date for when you next time you do a risk assessment. And I would suggest you do the risk assessment for every single tenancy for the time that it takes, especially because it needs to be done before the tenant comes into the property, before the day of check-in. It gives you then enough time to rectify any potential issues. And just because you've done it once, it doesn't mean that you won't have issues occurring going forward, because all properties change. Tenants use the property differently, things break down, you have fair wear and tear of appliances, etc. So there you've got all potential there for potential risks. So if you're risk assessing every time the tenancy changes, then you're always up to date. And then taking action to prevent the risks. So by having that risk assessment done, first of all, you've got your actions, so you know what you need to do, you know what you need to organise. It could be new locks for the door because the doors aren't safe, so you've got an issue with regards to the intruder risk side, or you haven't got enough keys for the windows, or you need to replace certain appliances because they may be not deemed safe, or they need to be upgraded, or they've broken down. So you've got the ability to gather all this information, create actions, and then that gives you an ability then to understand what costs are going to be. So you'll be able to plan your maintenance, you'll be able to plan your tasks, and also your contractors as to who's going to do what, how much that's going to cost you. And then that gives you a really good indication of what that's going to be cost against the revenue you're generating from the rental, so that you can understand what your yield is like, how much money that you're going to be making renting that property out, so that it's safe, so you're getting a better yield, you're getting a really good rent, you're getting a very good tenant renting a property, hopefully for a long time, and minimising any potential void periods, which again makes really good sense because any void period will be a cost to yourself. So by ensuring that you've got those actions, you've got those costs and tasks and contractors organised, planned, is in your maintenance plan, then your maintenance costs going forward should be relatively minimal because you've dealt with all the major things. And then it's just a case of maintaining all the way through. There'll always be a potential for a tenant maybe not to look after the property. It doesn't happen. It does happen. It doesn't happen as often as maybe it's kind of reported in the press, but it does happen. We know that. I've seen that. But it doesn't mean it has to cost huge amounts of money just maintaining the property. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be every single let that you're going to have as a landlord, as an agent, will incur mass amounts of cost. But it does happen. But so if you plan for it and you plan your costs out and you've got like a general fund, just in case anything over and above what you've planned happens, then it's a great way of making sure that the property is generating revenue, it's generating profit, rather than becoming effectively a financial black hole where you're just literally throwing money down it and never seeing any real benefit from that. So planning makes a huge amount of sense. And that's for the whole tenancy, not just about the maintenance, but for every kind of certificate, every kind of compliance that you have to deal with, and even just the general costs of things like agent costs, inventory report and checkout costs, cleaning costs, anything along those lines. They all need to be planned, and then at least that way you never get a shock, you never get an amount of money coming out of your monthly rent that you didn't or weren't aware of. And that's why you should always plan and review. So if you've done your risk assessment, you know what your 29 risks are. Out of those 29, maybe you have about 3 or 4 that you've got to deal with immediately, and maybe 3 or 4 going down the line that not so much immediate, low impact or medium risk, but you're going to need to deal with maybe as you go along forward. Then you can plan for that. And then if you plan, you've got the cost, you've got the ability to understand, okay, if I need an EICR in 2 years' time, because I've had some remedial work done and they've recommended that I have that done in 2 years' time, I can plan for that cost. Or if I've got an appliance that is going to be, or is already, say, 3-4 years old, likelihood is probably only going to last another year, I can plan for that, or you can plan for that. And then put that into your cost, schedule that cost, so you can either make sure that it's scheduled out through the 12 months or for the time of the tenancy, so that when you get to the end of the tenancy and you may be looking to upgrade that appliance or make those changes or do those certificates, you can make sure that you've got the money to do that, and you know when they're all going to occur as well. Excuse me. And by scheduling your maintenance, your risks, it means then you can make sure that you've got everything in place, ready to go. I did a podcast, which will be coming out shortly. Excuse me. And we talked about the fact that a lot of landlords wait until literally the last moment to do a gas safety certificate. And by the time they get to that point, there's no one there to do it. And then that tips them over into non-compliance. Last thing you want to do. So you need to plan, you need to schedule it, and then you understand the cost, and that builds your strategy for the whole of your portfolio, or be it one property, or it could be hundreds of properties, because the more you understand about the risks of the property, you can understand the costs, you can understand how you're going to maintain the property, manage any risks, and then hopefully then you won't get anything nasty at the end of the tenancy, i.e. with a tenant refusing to go, quoting the fact that there's loads of risks, loads of maintenance issues, nothing was done. You'll be able to, go back to the court or go back to the deposit dispute service, say, look, this is what I've done, here's the evidence, this is how I costed, this is when it was done, this is when it was scheduled. And that's what they're going to look for. They're going to be looking for compliance. They're going to be looking to see that you're a fit landlord, you're a fit agent to be managing that property, that portfolio, and mitigate down any potential fines. And penalties for non-compliance, as you can see here, can be quite wide-ranging. The Housing Health and Safety Rating System, which I mentioned earlier on, the HHSRS, at the moment it's unlimited. So it literally is going to be determined by the court or also the council or the health and safety executive. As you can see here, you've got gas safety regulations. So you're looking at about 5,000 for non-compliance. Same again for EPCs and electrical safety regulations, and also smoke and carbon monoxide regulations. And Housing and Planning Act 2016 could actually then ban the landlord, ban the agent from actually managing properties or having properties. So that, again, depending on your portfolio, the size, could be a major blow to your business model, your livelihood. A lot of landlords tend to use the property as maybe a pension pot or their sole income. So that has huge potential impacts on your earning ability. And as you see here, there's some huge costs for non-compliance. First one, landlord fined for 3 breaches of an emergency prohibition order. They originally fined 150,000, which got reduced to 32,000 on appeal. But even so, even at 32,000, for being fined that for failing to rectify safety standards in the property, because not dealing with the hazards there, that's a huge amount, especially if that's maybe one property, it's your sole income. That's a huge amount to have to deal with. And often there's more costs involved in that in regards to, if you were fighting it, what your solicitors costs, etc. So even at 32,000, that's a huge amount. And if they hadn't won the appeal, then 150,000, that could potentially decimate a property portfolio business, and certainly impact greatly on yourself as either the landlord and as the agent. So for me, it makes really good sense to get ahead of the game and deal with these safety hazards before it even becomes a question. Similarly, here you've got a landlord fined 16,000 for failing to obtain a HMO license and lacking fire safety measures. So the HMO license is one issue, but the fire safety measures should have been part and parcel of the license, but then should have been part also of the risk assessment of the property. So again, these are things that could be easily mitigated if they were dealt with properly right at the beginning. And as you can see in the third example, you've got management agents fined 21,500, one for failing to comply with local licence requirements, but also fire breaches, lack of fire escape, fire alarm, and also management agent failing to provide a gas safety certificate when requested. And they lost their first tier tribunal. And again, the risk assessment itself, the 29 risks, will take into account things like fire escape, fire alarms, and fire hazards in the property. Could they be electrical or otherwise? It would take those into account over and above the other compliance certificates you would have to have as part and parcel of the property, i.e. your EICRs, your gas safety, your Legionella risk assessment, etc. So there's so many provisions there that would negate this potential fine if the agent, if the landlord had used them. And the final one here, and they say this final one, this is just a snapshot of what is out there at the moment. A landlord was obliged to pay tenants almost 12,000 rent for unlicensed HMO, but they also failed to repair a shower. And also as a management agency failure around, informing of a change to HMO. So even if you take it back to just the failure to repair a shower, that's part and parcel of the sanitary side of the risk assessment. So, giving someone in the property or people in the property renting that ability to clean, to wash and be able to live comfortably in the property. So again, that's a major issue. And again, a risk assessment would have picked that up and would have potentially negated maybe not all of that £12,000 fine, because if it's not licensed, then obviously that's going to attract a fine. But certainly in regards to repair a shower, that would make a huge difference. So all of this can be negated by getting an inspection done. Now, landlords and agents, you can do your own. The software with inventory-based system allows you to do that. So you can get your own account, you can download the template onto your account, you can go walk around the property, look at the risks and deal with those and manage them, and then get the schedule condition and sort all that out as you know, as part and parcel of your general maintenance. But there is something to be said about having a separate person, having an independent person come into the property and to look at it, because they're dispassionate. And that doesn't mean they don't care. It just means they're looking at the fabric of the property. They're looking at the risks of the property from a neutral point of view. They're looking to say, you know, are those stairs steep? Yes. Are there handrails? No. So therefore, there's an immediate risk. Is there enough sanitary provisions within the property that are usable for the tenant to be able to wash, clean, prepare food, store food, etc.? If there's no there, then they can say, okay, well, this is what you need to do. So they can take a very factual viewpoint that will then allow you then to say, okay, now this is what I need to do. Sometimes I find when landlords and agents do their own reports, it's a bit difficult not to be biased, and that's not because it's conscious, but you all have different interests. It could be your own property and you think, well, I'd be fine with that. I'd be happy with that if there was no row on those stairs. I've been going up and down them for years and years, and I've never fallen over. But that's not about you. It's about the potential for the tenants. And it could be that, the tenants coming in, maybe a little bit older, maybe not as steady on their feet, might find it more difficult getting up and downstairs. And without those rails, that becomes a big problem. And equally, from an agent's point of view, quite rightly, you're looking at, your revenue stream, you're looking at keeping your landlord happy without costing them too much money, but should never be at the expense of making the property effectively a health and safety issue, a risk, a trap for tenants, because that could then potentially cause you problems in the long term. I perfectly understand that you don't really want those kind of conversations with landlords, especially because all the legislation that underpins the industry as it stands at the moment. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. There's a lot of cost involved. There's a lot of legislation that has to be adhered to, but they are there for a reason. And from my point of view, if you comply with those, then you're less likely to get fined. You're less likely to have problems with the tenants when it comes to checkout. You're less likely to have issues with regards to the deposit and how the property is maintained. Because generally, in my experience, if tenants are given a property of good quality, standing that it's safe and it looks well maintained, and the landlord has been very helpful in regards to making sure the property is safe, then they tend to respect that. They tend to look after it. Whereas I've found other properties that, to be honest with you, the landlords and the agents haven't really cared much about. It's more about getting someone in, getting the rent, and that's it. Then they've had problems. So there is a lot to be said about getting the property up to a good standard, maintaining it, and getting the right kind of tenants in for the long amount of time. So, as I was saying, as landlords and agents, you can do your own report, but you can also book them through inventory-based account using work streams. So work streams is a system that's inbuilt within the inventory-based system. So it gives you access both external, and if you've also got an account inside inventory-based, to be able to access other professional vetted inventory providers, risk assessors. You've also got Safe2, who do safety compliance certificates both for the rental and the buy-to-market, and you can access that. You can put the job out onto the system. All the suppliers who are active in that area can then bid on that particular job and then get back to you, and you can say, yep, I want to work with ABC Lettings or CD Lettings or whoever it is, or the risk assessor, and then be able to get that job done, put it into your system once they're finished, and then hold that report on your system for the length of the tenancy until you no longer need it, in order to showcase compliance and also that you've managed all the risks and been able to talk to all the providers. So you've got quite a few options. So you can do as we would say, in-house, do it yourself. You could outsource to inventory providers and save too, or you could use work streams to get access to a wider variety of providers, depending on, of course, where your property is, because you might be, I don't know, based in London, your property is up in Glasgow, or vice versa. So it has UK access, so it gives you plenty of scope to look after all of those potential issues and mitigate down those risks. So that is, in a very short webinar, what the risks are in regards to the 29 risks. So that's under the Homes Act 2018, which came in force in March 2019. Every property should be fit for human habitation. Every property should be safe for both the tenants to live in, but anybody going into the property, any visitors, contractors, agents, and also yourselves as landlords. So it makes sense to get the risk assessment done prior to the tenancy, so tenants going in. So don't wait until inventory or wait until they've already got in, because by that time they're in and it's more difficult to manage the property. Get it done before that point. So when you get to inventory, there should be no issues. And then when the tenant moves in, if there are any issues, they're probably minor and you'll be able to deal with them. Whereas if you're having to deal with maybe a big risk, like again, putting handles in or handrails in for a staircase, you know, that takes a lot of potential time, could be more cost because tenants are already in, and obviously difficulty with access, etc. So it makes sense to get the property up to spec, with the risks mitigated down as far as humanly as possible, using the risk assessment, using the facilities both on inventory base or work streams and safe too, and then that way then you can minimise any potential costs, hopefully mitigate down any potential fines, and also alleviate any potential issues and actions and discussions with tenants when it comes to the end of the tenancy, where maybe things haven't gone right, and it takes away that particular part of the argument that maybe the tenant might look to rely on by saying, you know, you didn't do this or you didn't do that or that wasn't safe. So you're mitigating that, you're taking that away out of the conversation. So that hopefully will mean then, you know, you'll be able to have a adult conversation or common sense conversation without too much emotion, because you've got all the facts, you've got all the evidence, you've got everything that you need to showcase it. You've not only kept the property you know, in a very good order, you've maintained it, you've mitigated risk down as far as possible, but you can actually prove that you've done that. So I hope you've found that useful. There will be more information on the show notes, but you can see here you can contact Inventory Base via our website, or our call number is there, and email, or you can also access work streams. If you've got a job that you want to put out into the system, just follow the link you see on your screen, and I will also show those on the show notes at the end of this webinar. So I hope that's been of use to you. Do feel free to give us a call or email us if you've got any other questions. And thank you for your time, and thank you for joining Inventory Base, and look forward to you on our next webinar. Thank you.